Sure.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
And we just want to like also tell you, I mean, seek your consent, because we would like to ask you a few other questions maybe at the end of the lecture, and as well try to do a kind of take us back to memory lane about your Nigerian project, the very grant you had, because we are thinking about maybe if it is very possible, just like the Dean is coming up with that very idea, we are thinking of also helping to collaborate with students back in Nigeria and helping them, just a kind of a way to, create this kind of not networking and all that strong network between students in the library field and others that are actually out of school already, but they really want to go in-depthly into the profession so that we can actually help to build each other. And because we know that we have professional, I mean, librarians actually coming over to the United States, conferences and all that, but you have few students actually having that opportunity to connect professionally with their colleagues. So we are thinking about, creating that platform, and we feel you're the right person to give us the counsel, especially because you have such experience, back then with, as a mediator between Nigeria and the United States. So we believe you could actually give us a heads up on what to do, how to go about it, and all that. So if you don't mind, maybe at the end of the lecture, when you're asking you questions, we might as well just try to figure out one or two ways by which we can do that.
Good. It's a little surprising that you come up with this, because it was one of the original objectives of the Nigeria project that because I taught a class in global information infrastructure and international information transfer. And I had thought that as a result of the Nigeria project, those courses will be taught in sync with similar courses in the library schools in Nigeria. So we pair students, a Nigerian student and an American student, to study the same focus and compare their resources or how they work with clients with the American partner, and come up with some thesis about what it means to practice librarianship in different cultural contexts. And if a client asks the same question in the US and in America, what would be responsible for generating different answers that will be satisfactory to clients at both ends of the spectrum? And that would give them a sense of what the information profession is actually about, that we can't predict what is a satisfactory answer, even if the question was exactly the same, because of so many contexts that define how information is perceived and applied and its impact in different environments. So this is something that we could pursue and see if we can implement it with schools that have networks, because that was the challenge we faced then. The schools in Nigeria were just getting computers, and so it wasn't possible to provide seamless and timely interactions between the Nigerian students and their American US counterparts. So that's a project that you may want to take on in your SCALA as some achievement to demonstrate the pros and cons, as well as the feasibility of international cooperation in training librarians to be globally versed in the differences between practice between the developed and the developing economies.
Thank you so much, sir. Wow, that's wonderful. So, sir, if you wouldn't mind, we would like to share your lecture guide, so you could actually see it on the screen why we plan to start up with the lecture proper. So, uh, so can you see the screen presently? Are you seeing it?
Yes, I can see. Yes, that's my the brief bio sketch
Okay. Do
that
you
I
mind?
sent.
Okay. Okay. Great. Yeah. So, sir, presently we are actually thinking about you maybe talking about yourself in this very context, or whatever you think will be very relevant for SCALA to know while we do the recording. And after that, I will just scroll down to the actual lecture guide, which is this one here. So that will help us to, follow you as you're giving the lecture, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, so I'll start with the brief bio sketch. I was born in Nigeria, had most of my early education in Nigeria, read library science for my first degree, and education, instructional systems technology for my master's, and I started teaching at my alma mater. I was particularly interested in how librarianship could be effectively practiced in a country where literacy is not prevalent, where less than 50% of the population were literate. And if libraries were going to focus on books that had information coded in the English language, then we were really running an elitist professional service. We were ignoring more than half the population. So I read instructional systems technology as an approach to finding other ways of coding information in other dialects and other codes that would be accessible to non-English speaking and non-print literate populations. When I went for my PhD at the University of Pittsburgh, I got interested in looking at what personality attributes would be appropriate for those who would reconfigure the information sources that were accessible to non-English speaking and non-print literate potential clients in the developing economy. And so I did my thesis on the impact of professional education on the personality attributes of library and information professionals, looking particularly at the nurturing of innovative and creative professionals who would reconfigure the practice model that were inherited from the West. I compared students who went through library programs with students who went through the law program and the social sciences programs, and compared who they were in their first years and what they had become on graduation in terms of their personality attributes. And so that's what has driven my interest in the profession. How we not only teach the content in terms of how to do librarianship, but also the kinds of mannerisms, the kinds of attitudes and personality skills that would foster creating variant models of library practice in populations that were different from where we were inheriting the profession. That also explains the kind of courses I taught when I came to the US. I did a postdoc in Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, before I came to Emporia, then went to University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, came back to Emporia for a second time, and now I'm attached to the Chicago State University, from where I'm on a leave of absence in Africa. So I think that in a nutshell is what has informed my professional practice to date. So shall I go on now to
Yes.
my lecture?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. It's nice to have you, sir.
Thank you. So, well, the lecture is broadly titled Library Development, a Global Perspective. The title is appropriate, not only because I've trained and practiced in two very distinct and different parts of the world, Nigeria and the US, but because of my interest in professionals generally, and professional development, and how it can be similar but different in different parts of the world. I have also read widely in library practice in Europe and Asia, Australia, and particularly how we handle non-literate populations and their knowledge base. For instance, indigenous knowledge has always been of interest to me. How do we ensure that the knowledge that we propagate, the bodies of knowledge that we preserve and disseminate, reflect the diversity of cultures and languages and value systems, contributions of humans in all classes and in all parts of the world. So if libraries are supposed to preserve, organize, and disseminate knowledge that would help humans face the future and solve problems and invent the future as they desire, we cannot say that one body of knowledge generated by the elite group alone have all the answers to the human condition, particularly if a group have their own knowledge systems that are not made widely available and are not considered in seeking solutions to global problems. And we really do not understand the problems we're trying to solve if we haven't analyzed and understood all the varieties of conditions that exist among different groups, and the value systems and the legal basis on which solutions may be imposed on people who don't share the same value systems or don't experience the problems as is perceived by one group. And today, with the information explosion, we're told that productivity and the economy today is driven not by land or minerals or technology per se, but it is by our perceptions and our ability to analyze situations by having access to all the knowledge that has been accumulated over time. It is access and understanding and the manipulation of that knowledge that generates new formula, new ideas, and new models for recreating the world. And so that puts the library and information science at the cusp of what the future will become, because we collect, organize, and disseminate this information. And a reflection of the significance of our profession today is the breakup was, breakup is not the right word, but the degree to which our profession has been splintered, because there is so much that needs to be handled and understood. So we're no longer just the library, archives, museums, information science, but now you have knowledge managers, you have information brokers, you have digital humanists, you have systems analysts, you have so many different professions who are handling information in different ways and bringing in new perspectives, new models that must be considered by anyone who is interested in how the national economy performs, or how take any profession, information architecture. You get into any profession, there are special groups that now focus on how knowledge is packaged and organized and made available to decision makers in their fields. So we don't have that monopoly of handling information for all disciplines anymore. And that, I think that is speaking to the degree to which all value in human endeavors are now centered on having access to the most current, the most accurate, the most pristine information that gives the insight to provide durable solutions for human problems. So if we are now at the cusp of what determines the future of humanity, how well are we training those who will assist decision makers and planners in having the most accurate, the most perspective, the most valid information to make their decisions and make their policies. Related to this is the degree to which technology has now undermined many of the assumptions that we made regarding how we do our work. We talk about what is original and what is not original. We talk about what has been copyrighted because it came out of an author who had done all the research. But today, so much information can be recreated, and such new information is very different from the original. And it is so transient. Because of technology, it can be manipulated and changed as it goes from one system to the other. And it brings us back to redefining what we mean by intellectual property rights. Who has copyright? What copyright supersedes the other when it is only a machine that manipulated what was initially copyrighted and is now equally valid and useful as the original copyrighted document. So this has modeled a lot of what we thought was settled when we went to library school. So I think these are the challenges that interest me, because if information is the defining agent, is the defining resource of our generation, then it is the quality of this information that we must monitor and fully understand, and try to differentiate, or at least understand the difference between what we do and what these other new professions that have emerged do, because they are handling information just like we do. They may only handle data. There is now a whole generation of professionals who deal with just accumulating research data, manipulating it, and coming out with new additional perspectives. Now, how do we ensure that first, that the rules that we set up for working with information applies to them, particularly when it comes to validating their use of information and whether or not the copyrights that we observe in our traditional library systems apply to these other bodies. Now, let me now move on to the global issue. If this is happening at the most developed economies where the power of information to drive an economy is so fully manifested, what does it mean for the rest of the world, which practices at different levels because there are different phases of their development, and because they come from different cultural settings that may not have been influenced by the same values as the Western economies. So in doing that, I want us, because I know Slim, having taught at Slim at other library schools, I know that Slim is strong on theory. And if, for instance, let me use this analogy, if a Turkish grandmother comes to babysit her daughter's baby in Cleveland, and she has some free time and goes to the Cleveland Public Library and picks up some newspaper to read and so on. She comes away with an impression of how American libraries are designed and run compared to the libraries she was familiar with in Turkey. Now, if she's just a fairly educated grandmother who didn't go to library school, who didn't go to professional, who doesn't have a graduate program, you wouldn't expect that they would have the analytic perspective as to why the Cleveland Public Library is different from the one she used in Turkey. And so if she goes so much, she's talking about the libraries in America, she's going to generalize and assume that what she saw in Cleveland is how all American libraries are run. But if you come out of Slim, you would say that is a description of one library. But to understand the difference between that library and the library she's familiar with in Turkey, you have to do an analysis of why that library operates the way it does and how you can use the American history, the publishing industry, the telecommunications industry, the American information policies, all this come together to shape the nature and the practice of the American Public Library that this woman experienced. And the same way, if you take the same model and look at the library she is familiar with in Turkey, you could also have an explanation as to why that library is different from the public library in Cleveland, because Turkey has a different history, different political environment, different relationships to the global publishing industry. There are books I could walk off the street in the US and pick up in any bookstore. But if I'm in Nigeria, I could search several bookstores in several cities and not find any book related to that topic. So again, this is how understanding our socio-cultural environment, our geopolitical location explains why a library in India must not be expected to look like the library in Emporia. So this model tries to identify some key factors that we must understand before we can explain why service at one country differs from the other. So if you look at that model, I, I, I labeled the first column determinants, the determinants of the character of libraries and library practice in a particular country. The first items we look at are international standards, which evolved from international organizations like UNESCO, ILO, International Labour Organization, the Telecommunications Organization. Some of their policies filter down to influence how librarians think about using telecommunications or relating to how to treat library staff. And UNESCO, what documents must reflect the contributions of a culture. And international library organizations like IFLA, if you're following IFLA conferences, there's one coming up in August in Malaysia. And of course, they talk about reference service, school libraries, indigenous materials, and so on. So when librarians come from different countries to meet at these sessions, whether it's conferencing or international meetings like under UNESCO, their decisions does filter into the national libraries, the national library policy-making bodies, and eventually some standards are internationalized. What you find in the US would be applicable to libraries in India, although it may have a more Indian flavor because of course, their culture, their language, their history, and so on. So going down to the second item, national and local orientations. Again, each nation would have a national library, the Library of Congress for the US, and under that, there are national library associations that also look at international standards and determine how they are applicable in their countries. And in those determinations, they reflect their national flavor. The national, if they're a democratic government, they would do things that involve input from all their branches. If they are in Nigeria, we used to have a military government, it would be something that the central government would decide and impose on the rest of the nation. So the political setting in a country decides the national orientation that is given to whatever regarded international standards of practice for our profession. The second column, I take examples as to what would be influential in interpreting those determinants. Under the international standards, we will say global networks and systems. What countries are your librarians more closely networking with? For instance, being a British colony, our first contacts and our most influential contacts were with the British library system, the British Library, and their associations and their library schools. And so a lot of our Nigerian library practices reflect British standards, at least in the first 2 decades of our independence. Since then, there's been now a greater American influence on what happens in our profession. Under the second item, national and local orientations, some of the elements I mentioned there are what are the regional, local knowledge systems that are in place, and how can a country see itself being competitive in terms of any unique features of their culture that could be marketed at a global fair. I think I will get back to this when we talk of economy. So I think I'm taking more time than I wanted. I think this is something that I'm writing up in a book. So maybe if you're interested, you can wait a couple of months to see the full volume. So let me quickly run through the other segments. The third item is library types. Of course, we have school libraries, public libraries, academic, special, archives, museums. Again, each of these would be unique in terms of their history, how they evolved. And as we shall see later, for instance, the school libraries will be impacted by national education policies. Do schools emphasize children reading on their own? Does the society generally encourage a culture of reading? Do their parents have libraries at home? Do they encourage reading? And do the teachers encourage having students interact and contribute to discussions in class? Or do students just go to class and copy notes from what the teacher is saying and memorize it and they pass their exams? All those have an effect on what happens in the university libraries and the special libraries, because if that's what children see, if that is what is expected of the education of children, that they go to class and just read and listen to the teacher, then it undermines what libraries are there for. It means students are not expected to go and do research on their own. They're not supposed to challenge what the teacher is presenting. So their essays will be a repetition of what the teacher had provided. And so that also impacts school libraries, university libraries, and special libraries, because those who come through have a fixed idea of what is expected to be successful, rather than be motivated to be creative, to challenge existing knowledge and to invent, to seek ways of adding to knowledge. Now, the next section talks about the economy. How strong is the economy? If the leaders, the decision makers in the country don't see information the way we view it as the driving force of the economy today, then they're not likely to vote money for libraries. That is what I find in Nigeria. And so money is diverted to the more pragmatic, the more obvious factors that drive the economy. It's industries, building roads, and so on. Even education is not prioritized as much. And so that also affects how much resources are available to libraries, to automate, to buy more current books, to invest in training librarians, and so on. Then national policies in relation to education, we talked about that in terms of whether creativity and independent learning is encouraged. How well are the information, media, and telecommunications and publishing industries developed? Because this is what libraries depend on. If you want to go into telecommunications today with things like digital humanities, scholarly, digital scholarship, and the open source, there is so much now that is available, but it must be driven by existence of strong telecommunications backbones, to have servers that run 24/7 so that information is available online any time of day. In Nigeria, we can only point to a few university libraries and special libraries that that benefit from that. The school and the university, most school libraries and primary and secondary school libraries don't, except the specialists, the elite, the private ones. Otherwise, online databases and open source are rarely accessible in the lower levels of education. Then infrastructure, the buildings, access to tools and ICT. Again, the prevalence of this in the West is what has transformed our profession, so that there's so many different professions that focus on just manipulating technology to develop new forms of information services. That doesn't happen in the non-industrialized countries, and so that accounts for the difference in access to information in those environments. And also, by the same token, if you don't have a lot of technology and easily accessible online information, then there is no pressure to train people who are computer literate and who can access information on tap 24 hours a day. So there are many college students, as I find in Nigeria, who are not computer literate. Even the lecturers are not, because not much investment has been made in ensuring that this new mode of delivering information on tap is prioritized in funding and training. Then moving down, we have least resources. How do we perceive our resources? If we put it out there as what helps students to write their term papers, then we're saying students only need to use libraries when they're preparing for exams. But if information is a driving force of societal development today, then we say all your problem solving, all your creativity, all innovations, all attempts to improve yourself depends on getting the right information, being able to analyze it and reformat it so that it's meaningful for your decision making to transform yourself. And so if we say living life successfully depends on your gaining sophisticated information skills, then libraries and information services become indispensable to progress in all forms. This is what I don't think librarians market well enough in developing countries, because libraries are still seen as where you go to when you're about to prepare for exam, where you need a quiet place to read. So you may take your own book to read because the books in the library are not relevant to what you need to do. I think it is that column that determines, if you use that as an analytic tool to assess any library in any country you are, you can now explain why libraries are the way they are, why they don't have reference services, for instance, or why they're not focusing on technology delivering information to people at their homes rather than them coming to the library. It is these key factors that provide the conditions that define the degree to which librarians can move their profession forward. Now, let me round up with the rest of that model, where we have service levels. Now, if in the last 2 decades we say that the major shift that has taken place in the library profession, the library and information science profession, is that we have shifted our focus from documents to users. So we talk about the user-centered information service. If we are user-centered, then we should evaluate our service by the degree of interaction we have with users. How well do we understand our users, and what is the level of engagement we have with them? And I put here three basic levels. Some of the papers I have written while I was at SLIM with Professor Greer and Grover touch on this, because I'm acknowledging that these are not anything new. If you read publications by your SLIM professors, retired now, you would know that we had talked about this more than a decade ago. We identified three levels of performance of libraries. One is the passive self-service level. This is where the library is just a place, just a space where readers can come and have the conducive atmosphere to reflect and to read. They may not interact with anybody. They come and serve themselves. It's like the fuel pump. When you want to put fuel in your car, you go to a pump where there's nobody there that serves you. You have your credit card, you have whatever you need, you swipe it, and you serve yourself. It is very, very efficient. If you look at the bottom, that is an efficient system. You control how much time you spend. You don't interact with anybody, it's only the machines. And if everything works, if your credit card is right, and you push the right buttons, you can be done in 10 minutes and you get your gas and you go. But if you're looking for information, and it is said that information seeking is a problematic process where you don't always get it right the first time. So sometimes you need somebody to negotiate your question and help you better understand what you're looking for. You may say you want a dictionary on elephants, but maybe your real question is, why are elephant tusks very precious today compared to 20 years ago? So if you interact with the reference librarian, he may be able to get you closer to pinpointing your question and getting your answer in good time. So that is the next level, the reactive level. The librarian reacts to the question you pose. Sometimes this interaction is very transactional. It is very programmed. They ask you a few basic questions. They're not really interested in what you're going to do with the information. So they tell you, go to the third shelf on your right and you'll find a book that has a title that is of interest to you. It may take you more time, you may come closer to getting what you need, but you really didn't have detailed interaction with an expert who has been able to diagnose your needs to the extent that they lead you straight to your answer. The service that is more, it takes a lot more time, but it focuses on the impact on the problem that brought you to the library, is the proactive service. The proactive service is where the librarian is an expert in the field in which you have a problem. And so they pose questions that gets you to really better understand your question. So it's a systematic, it's a conversation rather than the pre-programmed interaction at the reactive level or the non-personal service, self-service. So at this level, again, it depends on how well equipped your university library is, but it is a special library that invests more in having librarians who can interact in depth with clients to get to really understand what they need and provide information that really makes a difference, makes an impact on their job or whatever project they're working on. So if we're a user-centered profession, then we should assume that all the other factors lead us to moving from being just a location, a space where people can come and do what they need to do and should be satisfied with whatever they get out of it, to where, as a result of using our service, there is a positive impact in getting the problem solved the way that the organization or even their life problems are improved. So this is a suggestion that I think library school students should think about when they look at why they're in the profession. You're in the profession to improve the quality of problem solving in your community. And if problem solving depends on getting the most relevant and accurate and useful information related to a problem, then we should be moving from the efficiency level of evaluating our service to the impact level at which we think we transform our user and their environment because we got them to be more effective in problem solving using information. So I think that's enough of an introduction of the model. So should we talk about the Nigeria project now? Do you have time? I think we'll probably, do we have enough time to?
Yes, sir.
Maybe I should just take questions. Let me take questions from you and we can round up. Questions either about the Nigeria project or any other thing that you want to know from me.
Okay, sir. I think perhaps at the end of the questions we're going to ask you right now, we'll actually talk a little bit about the Nigerian project, our plans that we're having on ground, and we'll seek your counsels and advice, and then we'll see how we can go with it. So I will give the floor over to Brady Luke, the president of SCALA here at Emporia State University, to ask the first question, and we'll take it alternatively. Okay.
You have played an active role in the development of librarianship in Nigeria. An example of this is the role you served playing securing a grant meant for the development of libraries and library schools in Nigeria at the point when Nigerian democratic leadership had just started. Now, talking from a political angle and within a general scope, how much influence have you seen in the past 18 years that the government has on the growth and development of librarianship? And to what extent is this really visible in the day-to-day life?
Well, that's quite an all-encompassing question. Let me break it into bits. First, you want to know what impact the Nigeria program had, the Nigerian project had in the development of libraries in Nigeria.
Right, yeah.
Well, good. I came up with the concept of the Nigeria project when Nigeria was moving from a military dictatorship of almost a decade and a half to a democratic system. And under a military dictatorship, there had been very little democratic practices of involving all Nigerians in making input to policies or electing political leaders. And so I thought if Nigeria had been ruled by a dictatorship, then the development of civil society, the discourse of public policy, and coming to a consensus and making suggestions as to what is good for the country, or had been truncated. There hadn't been political parties, so there hadn't been opportunities for people to have civil discourse. And so library schools could play a key role first in preparing public and school librarians who would emphasize, teach how to read about democratic systems in other countries. And so when we came to Nigeria, we offered workshops in community analysis. How can public libraries analyze their communities so that they get a sense of what is needed and make available to them how they can coordinate civil groups to discuss common issues and make suggestions to the new leaders. So creating a forum for public discourse was one of our goals. The second goal was internet was just coming in. This was 2000 to 2004. And so we donated used computers from our labs in SLIM and set up cyber cafes on their campuses. And the grant paid for them to have access to a network. So they now could download information from the internet and read about how Western societies have used civil discourse in supporting democratic systems in the country. Now, as I said, some of the key objectives of the project were not fulfilled. For one, there was some disturbance in the parts of the country where the library schools were located. And so the State Department had advised against Americans being in those regions for the last 2 years of the project. And so we couldn't go out to the schools. We brought more of the staff and students to Emporia for those 2 years. And secondly, we were very ambitious as to the degree to which we would educate our counterparts to become computer literate and to move into their communities to disseminate information about community analysis and development of civil society. So, but be as it may, till today, I still get, when I run into my former students or those who had been part of this program, they tell me either they got jobs as a result of participation in the Nigeria project, and they are trying to implement some of the things we taught them. Things that are novel here, but if you went through the SLIM program, it was part of what was part of the core courses. What you did in 801, 802, 803, and just talking about that within the library profession seemed to empower librarians that they could do more for their societies than just cataloging books and handing it out to whoever needed to read it. We try to emphasize that libraries are not about just reading what others have written, but rethinking how you view your community and how you can help people make decisions that would improve life in their community, rather than reading only for exams. You have to live out the new knowledge that you're getting in terms of new forms of relationships between the library and the community. So to answer your question is that we didn't transform the library profession as a result of the 4-year project, but those we had opportunity to interact with saw librarianship differently. And I was fortunate that I was able to bring one of them to SLIM. He did his master's Suleiman is now a university librarian, and I think he is one of our success stories that he embraced and has been able to demonstrate the impact of the Nigeria project in his career as well as the libraries that he has worked in.
Thank you very much, sir. The next question, libraries have actually faced devastating budget cut down, even here in the United States. What are the sources of funding for libraries in Nigeria? And are there better ways of doing it than what the system presently uses in the country to fund libraries?
Yeah, could you repeat the question again? What are the sources of funding for libraries in Nigeria?
And do you think there are better ways by which libraries in Nigeria could actually find means to actually fund libraries back there, Nigeria?
Yes. Well, to start off, I would say that I was away from Nigeria for a long time, and I came back and I found that there is a special program which the federal government has set up. It's an agency. It's called TED Fund. It has to do with tertiary education funding. The Nigerian economy is run largely from our oil deposits. And so a percentage of the revenue from oil is allocated to this agency to support tertiary education. And I would say that the libraries, the university libraries, for instance, are run largely based on subventions from this agency. Although on paper, it is said that the university library must be allocated 5% of the recurrent budget of the university. The university, federal or state or private universities, I don't know that any university library gets that much, but TED Fund is where a lot of the support for libraries come from now. For instance, the university at Benue State University has received most of its funding from TED Fund, and between 2013 to 15, for instance, it received 210 million naira, which would, well, it is a couple of $1 million, but it's with that, the library has been able to set up a virtual library, subscribe to many databases, or have servers that will run 24/7 and therefore provide access to open access journals, and literally we have transformed our library services between 2013 to date as a result of money from these agencies. But something else that I need to point out, of which I am advocating for among librarians here, is that there's a lot of funding that could be acquired through grant writing, which is what I was doing while I was in Emporia. There's a lot of international funds that could be attracted to do projects in Nigeria, whether it is training, whether it is automation, and so on. So I advocate for training in grant writing. I have done some of it. I've trained, I've given workshops in grant writing. I think all library schools, particularly in developing countries, all library schools should teach grant writing as an essential part of the curriculum. Because when you go out and you don't get enough funds from your institution, you have to look out for funds from anywhere in the world. Many international organizations that would support the kind of things we're trying to do with libraries and information here. And so writing grants to organizations anywhere in the world would be what I would advocate to increase the funding that libraries can get in Nigeria.
Thank you very much. So as someone who's been around the field of librarianship for quite a while, what do you perceive as the potential future for librarianship, both in Nigeria but in the world in general as well?
Wow, that's a difficult question because there's so much that is in a flux today. As I said, our profession has been split into multiple independent professions. And so if I'm speaking for librarianship proper, I would say that it's both an exciting time to be in our profession, but I think we have to take our responsibilities much more. We have to be more creative in ensuring that we remain relevant, because a lot of these other professions seem to be doing what we started out doing, but they do it more efficiently because they are using new technology to do things faster, more efficiently. But what I think librarians can get an edge over these other professions is using the model of evaluating the quality of service. There's a lot that is being mass produced and mass delivered to anybody who logs on today. But if you really want to ensure that you're making the right impact, we must identify our key populations and find ways in which we understand them well enough to deliver information to them that is meaningful and applicable to successfully resolving their needs. So it is given value to the dictum of user-centeredness. If we're user-centered, then we must understand our users to the extent that we repackage our information and make it understandable and easy for them to plug into their problematic situations and get it resolved. It may mean collaborating with these other groups that are better at manipulating technology, but ultimately we have to be focused on the user and understanding the user to the extent that what we deliver, bring them back to seek our service rather than go on to our competitors.
Yeah, thank you very much, Star. The next question is about, it's majorly targeted towards new students, in the profession. So what would you advise a fresh library science student to start doing in order to have a good career path in librarianship, especially in Nigeria and also generally in the whole world?
Yeah, that's a good question because I have been involved in teaching classes here, and I see that many of our students come to read library science not because they don't understand what libraries are about, but they haven't taken time to study how this profession evolved and what role we seek to play in society, and how it is up to us, as professionals, to define our niche and make ourselves relevant in a society where sometimes students can get away and graduate without ever stepping in a university library, because they take notes from class, they read their notes, and they pass and go on. They don't know why they should go to a library to read any extra materials. So for young library school students, I would like them to read up on the history of the library profession and read up on the current trends that are shaping the profession, so that they are at the cusp of defining how librarianship can reposition itself to become an indispensable service in a developing country. I see a lot of libraries trying to operate like any library in the West, any academic library in the West, but we're not serving the same populations, we don't have the same resources, and so we must be the ones to redefine librarianship as pertains to the needs of the Nigerian academic sector, or the Nigerian professional sector, or the Nigerian elementary school population. We must take charge in reinventing librarianship for 21st century Nigerian population. And this is not what only the lecturers can do. The students who are new to the profession must think of how they can remain relevant, including being entrepreneurs and providing information for sale for the private sector. There are lots of opportunities for expanding the profession in Nigeria, but we must think out of the box. We mustn't be constrained by what our textbook tells us, the way libraries are operated in the West.
Thank you very much, sir. It's a privilege to actually have you around. We have actually learned a lot of new things today, and we hope that as we actually continue our communication also with Nigerians, I mean, library students back in Nigeria, we'll be able to create a more global, way of creating a better impact in our various society where we find ourselves. So much, thank you, sir. And I think Brady might have a final word for you.
I'll just thank you very much for coming, and we really appreciate it. I've learned so much already.
Yeah.
I really look forward to being able to kind of keep up our communication and share what we're working on in the future.
And so we wouldn't know if you have a final word also.
I'm always glad to reconnect with SLIM students. I enjoyed teaching and interacting with SLIM students, and as I said, I will keep in touch and will participate in the launching of the GRIA scholarship. So I look forward to hearing more about what you're doing. I think this is a new, this is a very laudable goal you've taken, to reconnect SLIM with the global professional practice again. And I will do whatever I can do to help you connect. If you want to work with Nigerian library schools and the Nigerian profession, I would love to work with you on that.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, and bye for now.
Yeah, bye.